would and should the U.S. actually commit U.S. troops to defend Taiwan if China were to move?
You know, I think that this is such a, you know, I think that this is a, this is, of course, a...
To all of you, and Congressman, I'll start with you, would and should the U.S. actually commit U.S. troops to defend Taiwan if China were to move?
You know, I think that this is such a, you know, I think that this is a, this is, of course, a very long-standing policy of the United States. And I think what we are hoping for is that we want to make sure that we never get to that point. And we want to make sure that we are moving in all of our economic research and our global positions to avoid any such confrontation and for that question to even arise.
Ambassador?
Well, I mean, obviously that's would be the president's prerogative as to how to deploy our military. I would just say that we have to deter and defend like we do here on the European continent, and most importantly, and I think one of the things that President Trump was able to accomplish by having NATO agree to 5% of GDP on defense and defense-related items is ultimately, that's now the international standard. That's the Koreans are planning to move out on that. We expect others in the Pacific to commit to that new global standard that we set at The Hague last year. But ultimately, sort of the plans to defend Taiwan and the president's trade space, I think for any administration, especially this administration, needs to be as broad as possible to manage that risk. And as a lawyer, I learned long ago not to play hypotheticals either.
I mean, if you talk about foreign policy, you're in the hypothetical business.
Yes.
Governor?
Contingency business.
Contingency business.
I guess I would just simply say that I think that Taiwan's independence, as I think Ukraine's independence, is just, and I think that it is it's in the strategic interest of the United States.
On Ukraine, what does victory look like?
Ambassador?
No, please, I'd love to hear your answer.
It is. The two that I am on the panel with are much more steeped in foreign policy than a governor is. But I do think that Ukraine's independence, keeping their land mass, and having the support of all the allies, I think is the goal from my vantage point. Go ahead, Ambassador. Do a better job.
I think, Congresswoman, I want to follow the order of protocol here.
Well, of course, there's no conversation about Ukraine that can happen without Ukraine, and so they, of course, lead in terms of setting their terms on this. But I think that overall, as a principle, we shouldn't reward imperialism, and I don't think that we should allow Russia to continue, or any nation to continue, violating a nation's sovereignty and to continue to be rewarded, and whose main lesson and takeaway is that they will gain. And so what that looks like in the specifics, I think, is a deeper conversation. But on principle, I think that is what we should be pursuing.
Ambassador, if Ukraine cannot retake all occupied territory, should the U.S. still push them for negotiations?
I'm not sure I understand your question. I mean, Ukraine obviously is in the middle of an attritional war where in December, the Russians were willing to sacrifice 35,000 Russians, over 1,000 a day. In January, it was 30,000, so 8,000 a day killed or gravely wounded. And there seems to be no end in sight for their capacity to throw soldiers at the front, very similar to a lot of other Russian wars of the past. And we're seeing how tough it is. And the Ukrainians have been brave They continue to fight, and be very innovative. I was able to go there in November and not only go to Kyiv, like a lot of folks go, but go out to Kharkiv, to within, less than 30 miles from the Russian border, and talk to the people that are fighting on the front line. And it was fascinating to hear their perspective and to learn sort of the lessons that are being there. But every single day that goes by, obviously there are small incremental gains that the Russians are picking up, and so this war has to end. This slaughter has to end. It's almost incomprehensible, the loss of life and the suffering that the Ukrainians are going through, especially as Russia attacks their energy infrastructure. I mean, it is horrible what is happening. The global world needs to stand up. But this war is being completely enabled by China. And China could call Vladimir Putin and end this war tomorrow and cut off his dual-purpose technologies that they're selling. China could stop buying Russian oil and gas. There are lots of opportunities for the world to put pressure on China. Any deal has, and this is something we agree on, has to be an agreement between not only the Russians, but the Ukrainians. And it has to be a deal that's acceptable to them. And, my biggest fear is that the Ukrainians, I think, are willing to make a deal right now that's reasonable, that under the circumstances would be fair. There's really no fair deal here because, again, Russia invaded Ukraine and has been, executing this attritional war. But I just am not convinced that ultimately the Russians are ready to make a deal or ever will be able to make a deal. But, I do pray for peace because this war needs to end. It's horrific. We see it every day. And it has to end. And President Trump is going to use everything he possibly can to continue until it's either possible or impossible.
I think we will have time for a lot of questions from the floor. Maybe just one question on Iran. Congressman, I don't know if you want to start us off, but basically, would you support direct U.S. military strikes on nuclear facilities if diplomacy fails with Iran?
I mean, I think that is a dramatic escalation that no one in the world wants to see. Right now, what the Iranian regime is doing, particularly with respect to protesters, is a horrific slaughter of, some estimates have tens of thousands of people. Now, I think that jumping into strikes, I think that right now we have so much, to me, there's still so much runway, so much that we can do to avoid that scenario.